for those who are bidding for Wave 2.2 funding. I'd argue it's probably useful as well, even if you aren't going for this funding. If you've made a decision now that you're not going to, it would be useful to consider some of these topics in preparation for any future waves of funding too. So the idea is that we can go through an agenda that covers off the key timelines for the bid and the funding announcement for those who are successful, that moves through to the delivery team, key project stages, bid on PAS 2035 and what that means for you in terms of the fund, risk management, and procurement and resident engagement. Now, the idea of us presenting it to you, us specifically, myself and Kyla, is because we've been involved with supporting funders, bidders with their applications for funding over the last wave and this wave. Also part of the delivery partner team, which is seeing those projects that are funded by Wave 2.1 delivering the works over these next 2 years. And I have some experience of delivering my own energy efficiency projects and retrofit and regeneration projects in previous years. So we come to you with some experience and just oversight on best practice, but really this is also a forum to bring forward any of your experience and questions and share with each other too. Quick look at the timelines. Just note that the submission deadline has been extended to the 31st of January. So originally it was published as the week commencing the 15th of January. This has now been extended to the end of the month. The submission portal, if you've not used it before, there'll be more details announced on that, but it usually opens 5 days before that deadline, and it's a portal where you yourselves as the bid leader will submit the application form to that site. The application portal closes at 1 minute to midnight on the 31st. After that, you'll go through another month where the bids will be evaluated by the contractor that DESNZ, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, will appoint. And successful projects will be notified in late February, March. The grant funding agreement, that's your last piece of the puzzle after you've heard if you're successful or not, that will come through in March. And that grant funding agreement is a key document that links your key project milestones, your deliverables that you've stated you're going to achieve, into the grant funding agreement. And those are what you will report upon monthly as you go forward with the scheme over the next 2 years. So the idea of talking about delivery today is just to put a bit of thought and emphasis over those areas that you need to think about to get up and running once the grant funding agreement has been signed, and therefore have a better understanding of any risks you might have around your time, cost or quality of the project that you can already start building into the bid application with correct mitigations so that you put yourself on the best foot in terms of that application and eventually the grant funding agreement should you be successful. Think project delivery. So if you think about the application form, it's built up into 3 stages. You have that strategic fit section, you then have the delivery assurance section and the value for money section. Throughout all of them, you're demonstrating confidence and building confidence in the reader, the evaluator, that you are able to deliver a project within the funding principles. So meaning that the projects you've identified, the works you've identified for those projects are going to meet the funding outcomes of space heating demand, increase in EPC, reduction in fuel poverty, reduction in bills. But you're also saying that it can meet the time principles, as in delivery within the 2 years, and to the quality standard of PAS 2035. So when we are talking about delivery assurance, that section in the middle, this is where a lot of the content from today will probably come out in your application. So one of the areas we want to talk about is project delivery team. You'll have a section, an annex, where you can do you can submit an organizational chart, which will show the team who are responsible for delivering the works or connected to delivering the works. Your delivery team is going to be made up of, I'd say, project management processes, those who will be in charge of that, and then those who will be in charge of cost and quality management. That's the way you can break it down. So looking at governance and reporting channels agreed, who are those who are involved in the steering groups, perhaps, that are responsible for the project, who are in the monthly meetings, the contractor meetings, resident meetings. Having that already identified and bringing that out through your answers is going to be quite an important piece, but also laying the foundation and getting those set up before the funding's agreed is going to be important for making sure you can step off on the right foot when you launch your project. If you look down and you consider let's look at our list a bit further down. Project surveyors, project quantity surveyors, contract managers, health and safety lead. Being already engaged with the team who will be running these is, again, part of you setting yourselves up for delivery in terms of knowing that you have costs that are robust, that are evidence-based, but also that you have a project plan within your application that is realistic to be able to deliver. Another thing when you're talking about having yourself prepared for project delivery team is also understanding the workload and the competing demands of all of your project delivery team as well. So one of the things we always want to avoid when we're seeing applications being written is that they're written in a silo. And if you're a bid writer on this call, it'd be interesting to know as well who's actually on this call, what roles you fulfill. As a bid writer, you're wanting to make sure that those who you're including in the application form are already engaged with and are aware of the workload that this project and time commitment that it requires, so that you can, in fact, produce a project plan that is going to be deliverable and something that you don't need to immediately change at the point of signing the GFA and when you announce any funding. If you delay any conversations like that, you're at risk of having to change the parameters of the project, perhaps under-delivering the initial amount of work you're hoping to do, and also just causing a bit of aggro, of course, between teams. I think missing off this list in the project delivery team, because you have your governance processes there, those who will be project managing as well, and those who will be looking at your costs and quality. There's also your resident team. So anyone who's engaging with the resident or the households who will be impacted by the project. I'd extend that to even mean any groups that you have in your neighbourhoods who operate around. Are they engaged with, are they aware of the works that are going to go ahead? For example, do you have local energy community advisors or any working groups in the community that your residents are often in contact? Would they benefit knowing the project details so that they can also create a bit of an extra support mechanism in delivering this scheme? Now, project management and reporting, this is an area that isn't always fully answered in application forms, mainly because we're not very explicit often about us having a project management methodology. And this was something that came up in last year's application form, was that the section around delivery assurance had limited answers around how applicants were actually going to manage their projects. So when we talk about that, what we're really talking about is your project management techniques and making sure as a lead applicant you've developed an evidenced project plan. And you want to demonstrate that you have governance mechanisms in process. So meaning, do you have regular meetings? Do you have milestones? Do you have software that you use to manage a project? You're also talking about how are you managing the project quality? So if you have a process for quality assurance, making sure that that comes out in your application, but also that that is something that you are set up to deliver. For example, when we talk about quality assurance, do you have a retrofit project oversight board who would be checking the progress of the work alongside the project manager to make sure that it's meeting the overall objectives of a longer project retrofit program of works? And we also talk about the lead applicant's responsibility to understand and implement the project management techniques. You're going to be wanting to think about how you've evidenced your timelines in your project plan and that management. So, for example, evidence can include risks that you've garnered from lessons learned on other schemes, lead-in times for other tasks that are outside of your control, such as planning permission, and also any risks around resident involvement or engagement that could lead to resident refusals. When it comes to the department, they'll be using core milestones to track the project. And that's one way you might also want to already structure your project plan. You'll see that the application forms, the guidance document for the application form for SHDF has an Annex A, that specifically focuses on how to produce a good project plan and the minimum criteria that the department are looking for in terms of your answer and your project plan annex. Now, within this, at a minimum, you'll need to include the core milestones that will then be used in your grant funding agreement to track the progress of the scheme on a monthly basis. These milestones will include project team setup usually. So when have you got project team fully established? When have you built your pipeline of homes already engaged with that household? When have you started works? When have you done dwelling assessments? When you're handing over when you're handing over the measures to the householder? And then any follow-up monitoring and evaluation you might be doing. Having those milestones understood fully for yourself is going to be key at this stage, because you're going to need to make sure that you have planned in enough contingency time for any slippage. So when you're looking at these milestones in your project management and reporting sections, you'll want to understand if you have previous experience that you can lend to creating those timelines. Now, I imagine if you're here, you've already done a lot of the heavy lifting of identifying your projects. You've probably gone through data quality assurance to make sure that the information you have about your stock is accurate, and that you know that the outcomes that you've planned in terms of the energy efficient measures are going to be X, Y, and Z, and you plan to achieve them by spending this much money. So you also have your budget sussed out and hopefully agreed to. So key project stages at this point. You want to understand, have you met compliance? So understanding the works that we have planned, our contractor in place, if they are in place, or the contractors we're looking at, are we going to be compliant with PAS 2035? Are your retrofit assessments going to be compliant with the PAS 2035 standard that you require? And are you going to be able to complete a sample of dwelling assessments prior to starting the works, just to give yourself confidence that those properties that you've identified and the measures are in fact in line with what you'll be delivering? Moving on from that, have you started to engage your supply chain? You established connections with possible contractors and developed justification for your costs. This is something you'd be imagining to do already, if not before Christmas. I know many of you have long-term relationships with contractors who are delivering similar works to other properties. So again, when you're building your application, when you're starting to prep for delivery, how confident are you about your costs, and what is the evidence behind that? Engaging the tenants is also something we're just talking about. You will have already possibly done some longer term planning with your residents around energy efficiency, mold, damp condensation issues. So at this stage, this close to when you could be starting delivery, you're talking about when will you be raising awareness and launching your communications plan around the works that you're planning to do. You're also considering at this point, have you identified all those vulnerable households and started to make provisions for them, such as temporary accommodation to another nearby property, or any way you can increase their comfort during those periods of time that might be more invasive with the work? I'd say it can't be underestimated how much having a vulnerable resident or resident refusals can disrupt a programme, and I'm sure you all know this, but it's a case of identifying those households, and at the very worst case, having a good, healthy reserve list of properties who are also going to be engaged to fill in, to avoid any disruptions to delivering the programme of works, and then understanding how you can treat that property and push it to the latter half of your programme if needs be. You're also at this stage looking at a chance to reduce all external risks to the project pause. There are only so many things that you have within your control. You know, the data accuracy of your properties, your project team being in place, your contractor being procured. But there are other elements that impact the delivery of your program, such as your district network operators, securing planning permission, and also, again, your residents. These are relatively out of your control. However, by using lessons learned from previous delivery, you might be able to identify those risks and bring forward the mitigations into this project, as well as making sure those mitigations are discussed fully in your application. You'll also want to understand the lead-in times to engage with your local planning authority, any stresses they might be under, and with your DNO, you want to be already engaging with them now, given that it can take several weeks to get a suspension, to get a diversion agreed. And we'll just have a look at the PAS roles. I'll just run through them for anyone who's not aware. This is retrofit assessor through to evaluator. The process is almost chronological in this way. You know, you're starting with a dwelling assessment and data quality through the retrofit assessor. You have the coordinator who does have overall responsibility for each stage of the retrofit project, including has accountability for maintaining the residents' interests as well. You have your retrofit designer preparing technical design or retrofit, installer who's doing the physical installation to the quality, to the standard, and then the evaluator who's monitoring the outcomes. You can imagine why it is important, or why you might wish to go with distributing those roles either in-house or to different contractors, so that someone isn't marking someone else's homework, to avoid any risk around the quality that's being delivered. Now, PAS 2035 dictates you need individual retrofit assessments for each property, that you can't build a program around. You can't build a program around presupposed measures. So in an ideal world, not before you submit the bid, but at least during the whole process, you have assessed all properties. You've undertaken an improvement options evaluation. This is a way of addressing issues of not knowing what possible measures you'd be going for. So essentially an IOE tells us which measures should be installed. You would have produced a medium-term plan, and this is a medium-term plan is basically you establishing a stage sequence for the installation of measures that aren't necessarily just funded through the SHDF. It's like the medium term of what else you could be delivering. It's a recognition through the PAS standard that not all landlords, housing associations will be able to afford the installations necessary to improve the house all at once. And so the MTP is a way of showing that longer term plan to improve the household's energy efficiency. And then ideally, you'd also have procured designers and contractors. Again, I think it's worth stating that this isn't necessary for you to submit the bid for Wave 2.2. However, in this process of gearing up for delivery, we are entering quite a competitive market, at least in the way that there's going to be a lot of demand from housing associations and a lot of contractors who are going to be able to pick and choose. And therefore, already having this early engagement with your supply chain is key in order to make sure that you are able to start delivering soon into the spring, summer of this year. Risk management. So risk management plan, in terms of the application, if we start there, there is a risk register template that is advised for you to use. That's supplied by the department for the application form. It covers some key risk topic areas which you'll be aware of, such as risks around entry to homes, so resident refusals. You might have supply chain issues, so not being able to procure on time a contractor. Weather, adverse weather disrupting program, and costs inflation, for example. So when you're coming up with a risk management plan, that's going to be something that you'll do in the background, not necessarily just for the application. And it's something that is part of your project management process that needs to be adopted and already held throughout the project's life cycle. Risks are obviously changeable over time. And so the risks that you put forward for your application are very much based on your current stance. Like, where are you at today? And when we talk about risk, we're talking about the impact today, the probability of it happening, and then what your mitigations are in place and how those reduce the risks. So I think something that's important to start understanding who's going to be doing what as well in your team is how are you going to assess the risk associated with delivering this project? From that project team that we mentioned in the first slides, who have you already engaged with, and are you picking up the risks that they've identified and already getting them to work through mitigations? The thing with the risk register is it doesn't need to have been complete. It is a live document. So in a sense, your mitigation can be forming and changing as the risk's probability or impact increases. And so using that stakeholder group you have of your project team can help you inform a much more accurate risk register. And ultimately, by doing that, what we're doing is identifying risks that can be costed if necessary. And then that starts to build your contingency budget for enabling the project to meet its targets within the time, cost, quality that you've set out originally. Who owns the risk register? This might change throughout the project lifecycle, but it's important that already you've identified who you will be handing any risk register over to and the risk management overall. So if there's a process in place, such as an agenda point on a retrofit steering group board or the project team board, understanding who's going to be inheriting this risk management plan and when that's going to happen is key so that things don't drop off. There can be a bit of a break between once you've written the bid application form that's been submitted and then you wait to hear back, especially if you are only running the project based on receiving the funding. That kind of downtime is exactly when you should be kind of warming up the delivery team if that's not going to be yourself. When we review an update, having regular meetings around the project progress might seem like a no-brainer, but emphasizing that risk has to be tracked and monitored is going to be key, because that way you can already have oversight of any risks that didn't really seem like any issues before they become issues, basically. So with increasing risk on a monthly basis, that is obviously one way you can observe a risk turning into an issue. However, I would say it's already going to be integral to look at your risks increasingly at those first few months as you're going into contract, as you're starting to find out and open up the homes and see if they are actually at the EPC level you thought. As you do start to communicate with your residents and you understand, are your comms plans working, or are you getting more refusals? So risk is throughout the project, but you might find as you're starting to deliver a project, that's when you want to more frequently update the risk register. Mitigations and actions, and delivering the mitigations and actions. This goes back to a very simple project management method of just doing the RACI chart. So a responsibilities, actions, informed and consulted chart of different responsibilities across the project team. Today, as you're writing the bids, that RACI chart probably looks very different than it will do when you're delivering the scheme. And so again, at this point, it's probably quite a good point to start planning who will be taking ownership over managing the mitigations for each risk identified. Thinking of examples of where this has worked quite well, we've seen best practice where housing associations who bid and receive funding are doing handover processes where they keep the initial bid writing team loosely involved with the whole project as it's delivered, so they can better plan for risk management and involving the stakeholders in any future rounds of funding in writing the bid. In terms of procurement, if not already procured a main contractor to deliver the retrofit measures, you'll be aware that a lot of contractors are already delivering wave 2.1 and finishing up wave 1 of SHDF funding. In a way, this is great for the market because we have a lot of projects to learn from, and ones that are already delivering now where you can understand any risks associated with delivering these measures to certain typologies of homes, get insights around costs and benchmarking costs from the market to deliver the works in the last year. So in a way, when you partner and you identify your contractor, you are actually going into a market that's a bit more knowledgeable than it was 2 years previously. That puts you in a stronger position for creating confidence around your costs, hopefully, but also confidence to identify correct mitigations to enable your project to deliver. You want to be prepared for challenges because everyone is going to the market for the same things at the same time. We've seen that being overcome by consortiums, so consortia, for example, who might come together as housing associations to create a framework to then attract bidders, attract consultants that they can then use together. You might also look at doing something that's more area-based and collaborating with other associations in the area so that you can deliver retrofit at scale and not just piecemeal across a location. Well-defined projects with clear specifications, objectives, and best data present the least risk to suppliers. I want to highlight this because we have examples as well where a scheme has come through with data that has low confidence around the starting position of the house, the occupants as well are fairly unknown, and getting to site has presented a lot of issues when we open up a house and we understand that it's actually not, it's just not as poor as they might have thought it is, or it has added complications that weren't picked up in any of the stock asset data. Now, this is troublesome. It can create delays in the program resolving and remediating some of the kind of condition issues with the building, and therefore this can add to issues with your supplier. So having your project defined clearly, knowing that your data is accurate, and also being very clear on the specifics up to which performance outcomes you need the property to meet, it's going to enable a supplier to cost it more accurately and have confidence of what they're proposing they can deliver. They will be able to deliver, and that's the position both of you want to be in. With resident engagement, we talk about kind of it being a longer life cycle. So it's a longer program of communication. It's not just communication via letter about works that need to be done to the property. And sometimes an association, you might not even recognize that you have ongoing communication going on in terms of cost of living crisis or sustainability objectives that your company is trying to achieve, or reducing fuel bills. These are key messages that you might already have going on, and you'll want to connect any of your resident engagement work to that now as well. So in terms of getting ready to deliver, and just before hearing any certainty about the grant funding agreement, if you don't feel comfortable going out directly to those properties, remember that there are overarching longer term key messages that you could be promoting across your residents, rather than just the specific works you're going to be doing to enable that buy-in eventually. In terms of the application form, you'll want to acknowledge the channels of communication that you have set up for your residents to communicate, not just with you, but for you down to them and via the contractor or any other third parties. It's key to remember that a tenant liaison officer or a resident liaison officer in themselves attached to the contractor can be a brilliant thing to harness as your person on the ground to communicate and present that face of your organisation to the residents so they feel listened to. However, you might also want to consider that they don't have full accountability of the scheme after the works are completed, and you in fact do. And therefore, having that resident engagement or neighbourhood team who can offer that longer term accountability, so not just the consultant or the contractor's RLO, can be a key person to have in place to enable a smoother transition once the measures have been completed, handovers done, and for any future tenants who move into the property, so that you know that the measures are actually and the kit is being used correctly. Involving the technology and the product suppliers is also another great way of being able to show how the kit can be used properly. And so at this stage of delivery planning for Wave 2.2, you're going to be wanting to think about that handover process at the end. So what are the communications materials that we have in place that are going to explain to people how to use the kit? And consider in the procurement of the suppliers and product developers, how are you going to stipulate that in their contracts with them? Are you going to be looking for them to deliver a certain amount of home demonstrations or a certain amount of multimedia handover materials? Your engagement is going to be dynamic. And throughout the process of delivering the program, your program of works, you're going to find that it's quite a good chance to reassess how your delivering works. So that's key to also consider when you're building in your delivery planning now, is those checkpoints where you can change or reassess and evaluate how your program of works is performing. You can do that from different views, so different stakeholder views, perhaps with customer satisfaction surveys with your residents who are receiving the works, checking in with the contractor to see if the order of works in terms of their supply chain, but also with your team in-house who might be having to, as support functions, is the reporting cycle working for them or not? Is it too overburdensome? Does it actually does it convene with another reporting cycle and means they aren't able to do it on time? Now, going away from the resident engagement side and going more towards awareness of things that might be outside of your control, we're talking about, at this stage, are you aware of your Energy Network Association product database? Do you know who your DNO is, so your district network operator? Can you contact them? And are you aware of the contact lead-in times to get any disconnections done or deviations? With the supplementary planning document your local authority has that could impact on retrofit. So are the works you're doing, are they going to be able to go under permitted development, or are you going to have to adhere to a certain SPD on water neutrality or conservation? So having an idea of what is going to impact your planning time and lead-in times is also going to be important. We've put capacity with local planning authority teams at the bottom of this as well, to suggest that retrofit is dealt with in different ways. As I said, some work can be done through permitted development, which is a much quicker route in theory than having to go through a full application. However, at this point, we're not necessarily seeing this prove a problem for Wave 2.1 delivery. So I would say it's just more contextual about your local area, knowing your planning team and understanding the projects you're doing, are they going to require these works? Now, Utilities and planning approvals, there's a little bit more on this slide about that, but I wouldn't say we need to spend too much time on it. Again, it's about early engagement with the district network operator for applications to connect heat pumps, and also consideration of where removal of gas meters when you're moving to electric, and moving telecoms connections for external wall installation. So if you're planning to do EWI, I would say this is where you're going to need the most focus and attention with early engagement around DNOs and with the planning department, because these are the ones that will be determining what can be and can't be done. All these issues can result in delays to the programme, extra cost and contract variations. So especially in your application form, you're going to be wanting to bring out in the risks register, as well as through your questions under delivery assurance, how you've already demonstrated that you're engaging with these two players to ensure that your scheme can go through, or you're aware of the timeframes it will take to enable the works. So I'd say that was quite a quick fly through of delivery in terms of what you should be thinking about to deliver your Wave 2.2 project. The key thing about getting ready for delivering retrofit for Wave 2.2 is understanding your project team, your handover processes between those who are writing the bid and those who will be delivering the works, and also understanding your project timelines. This is one of the largest areas that will get shifted, of course, with delivering projects that are complex, but in a way you need to demonstrate as much confidence around those timeframes and the cost, and the fact that you're meeting the quality that's required at PAS 2035 for your schemes in this application, as well as setting the stage to actually deliver to those promises that you're setting out in the application form.